That when I drop it and then I pick it up again, I open the last chapter with the underline. I write myself, this is where I was.
That's funny. Yeah, that's nice. I do the same thing. I mean, when I read, I underline them if I can.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, so these are from
Did
him.
you like it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not the type of book I normally would pick up,
I didn't do
but
anything.
it's so engaging.
I was in Peru last
The
year.
language
Oh, wow.
is just beautiful.
Yes, that's yours.
This is so cute.
Yeah, this is the filigree from him.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Oh, this is my favorite chapter.
Take it, please. Take a picture. You guys can take this. Yeah. But
Oh,
this is.
my
This is for
favorite. I
sale.
love
Oh
it.
man, they can hear everything we're saying. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, the bit.
No.
I love it.
Do that
Okay.
in your next.
Okay.
Oh, that's the Bibliothora?
I really love
Yeah,
it.
you guys
That
can
was
take
my
any of these pictures that you want. Just
Alright.
this is all that I have, so I can't give this away.
Please don't give those away.
Yeah.
No. Those are so cool.
Yay, good morning.
Andrea, right?
Yeah.
You know what? I want to put this in.
You should have given that me.
Oh. Oh, not again.
No, we didn't. We didn't. If you send me an email, I will.
Oh.
Thank you. So it's so funny because we went to Peru end of 19.
Yeah.
And hiked the last 8 miles of my beach.
Wow.
Just the last 8. There's no way I was in good enough shape to be arrested. And then went to some little villages down at like Titicaca and stuff like that. So it felt very real.
That's really cool. Thanks for this is great. For the organizing is wonderful. I
יש לי משהו להגיד לך
just
אחר
you
כך.
or
I'm gonna sit right here. So. Super exciting. I should take a picture of this. I don't know if I can.
color, so the publisher was like, no way.
Hi, Kelly.
Yes.
This is the one that, this is the one you're gonna be interested in, not that one, I don't think.
Can you hear me, Maria? Oh, great. So guys, I know you can hear the PJC, but the monitor at the PJC, for some reason, the speakers are not working. So Anna will function as the intermediate between your questions and Jordan. You'll be able to see Jordan and Barbara and everything, but if you have a question, and Anna will have to relay it to Jordan. Okay, so that's the only thing. Other than that, all good. And if you're comfortable with keeping your camera on, it's nice for people at the PJC to see your faces. So that's your option, of course, but that's my suggestion.
Mhm.
There's nothing to hear.
You just heard,
Oh, yeah, I heard him.
Sam, so.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to give him something special. I can't just say happy reading to Sam.
Oh, I want to.
Are you keeping the record order?
What do you,
Who's calling?
oh, no, I haven't. But I
I'll
think
keep
most
track of it.
people
but
have
Most people have. so
had
it's
their
okay.
books here. Most people here have brought their.
Hi again, the people who joined us now. Good morning. I was just saying that unfortunately the people at the PJC cannot hear you directly if you ask questions. Anna will function as the intermediary. So when we get to the Q&A, if you ask questions, Anna will listen to them and relay them to Jordan, just so you know. But they can see you, and I know you can hear them. I'll turn their microphone on in a second, okay?
Great.
This is Gloria and Joe.
For Gloria and Shel. Yeah. Is this one of yours or one of mine? Is this one of yours or one of mine? Oh, okay.
So now Julia's gonna bill us for these?
Oh, these are all from my pile. These are all from this pile.
And I'll have to give you a check.
Okay, let me, I wonder how I can write it down.
Sheldon has money with it. Figure it out.
We
Okay.
should start, well, finish.
Yeah, I should
up and
keep
we
track, but,
start.
for Gloria
Yes,
and
I'd
Sheldon.
like to.
Okay.
I think so.
These are the filigree from
Yeah.
the book, from a
What
chapter
do
in
you
the
think
book.
is best?
There's a jeweler who makes these jewels.
Yeah.
Or you can, I mean, you're the.
We're going to start very shortly. Hello? Okay, it just happens
Okay,
that
so 4.
today is my
I'll
mother's
keep track and I'll
12th
let you know.
yard site.
4.
So I wanted to say, Mister.
Folks,
Hi, Sheldon.
hey folks, we're gonna start in just a second. Gotta,
Okay.
command the room. We're gonna start in just a second. As Barbara was just saying, it's so now you can.
All right, it's my mom's 12th yard site today, and I would like to say Yisker. So, okay.
So the thing that actually sort of inaugurates cottage usually is a teaching of some kind.
Okay.
So I will share one quick text, and then that'll inaugurate. That's the original purpose of cottage, was to say thank you that we just learned some Torah. So I will share something quickly that probably you have already heard. Let's see. So there's a famous teaching in all right. There is a famous teaching that is included somewhere in the Nisigarim that you're supposed to follow the Lord your God. They say, well, but the God is a consuming fire. So how are you supposed to actually be like God? And the classic teaching, the classic Buddhist teaching is you're supposed to adopt the attributes of God. So just as God is kind, you are kind. Just as God can heal the sick, so you heal the sick. Just as God takes care of people in need, so you take care of people in need. And it's a simple teaching. It's a famous teaching, and it focuses our attention like a laser on this world and on what we have to do in this world now, how we have to take care of each other, which is what the rabbis are always talking about everywhere, in every place. Which is, I think, on some level, what Jordan's book is about, and I think what most of the Torah can basically be summed up that way. And with that, we will say Kaddish, and then we will welcome Jordan. up
Just
to
wanted
the
to say
stage.
one thing. My mom's name was Selma Saunders, and she'd probably really like to be here.
So Kaddish is on page 82, if anyone else is saying Kaddish. Okay. Go ahead.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah.
Amen.
Ve'alma di barak yurtei ve'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei di kol beit Yisrael. V'agala uv'zman kari v'yimru.
Amen.
Yehei shmei rabba mebarak le'olam l'mei amaya. Yitbarak v'yishtabak v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. Yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudisha.
Richu.
Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata damiran b'yama v'yimru
Amen.
yehesh lama rabim min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru
Amen.
oseh shalom b'mramav huya aseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Toda rabah. Thank you very much. Okay. Come up, Jordan. Hey, I'm pleased to introduce my friend and former Learning Center student, Jordan Salama. Jordan's book, Every Day the River Changes, was published in November, and it was reviewed in the December 3rd issue of the New York Times Review of Books, a copy which is out on the table. As a lover of good writing, I will say that Jordan's writing is superb. Enjoy it. And I prepared a few questions for Jordan. Afterwards, feel free to pose your own questions. If there is time, those who have read the book can begin a discussion. Okay, as a young educated adult from Pelham, what sparked your interest in Columbia and the Magdalena River?
Can everybody, I don't know if this, I just want to make sure that the people on Zoom can hear me okay. All good? Okay, great. Thank you, Barbara, for setting all of this up. It's been many months in the making, so this is very exciting. A lot of people ask me why I ended, or how I ended up in Colombia, a country that I have really no connection to at all. I'm not Colombian. I was born and raised. Yeah.
If you want to take off your mask, you don't have to, but if you want to take off your mask, you can.
I'm getting the no from the infectious disease doctors in the back. So, but hopefully this is okay. So yeah, how did I get this connection to a country that I really have no connection to at all? I was born and raised here, but my family kind of comes from everywhere. As many of you know, my mom was born in Baghdad and emigrated to Long Island when she was 7. And my dad's family is from Argentina, but before that, they were Syrian Jews from Damascus and Aleppo who ended up in the US by way of Latin America. So we have family in Mexico and Venezuela and in Argentina, in Bolivia, in Spain, pretty much everywhere. But you know, the way that I ended up in Colombia was kind of a coincidence. Basically, I was in school in college after my freshman year, and I knew that I was interested in Latin America because of this family connection, and I knew that I wanted to write about nature and people and the environment. I had an opportunity to work for the Wildlife Conservation Society somewhere in Latin America, but I didn't know where. And one day I got a phone call that there was an opening for an opportunity in Colombia. And immediately everybody around me was very scared because Colombia here in the US has a reputation, a certain stigma, maybe you could even call it, of violence and of war. And people were like, basically don't go. The school made me sign waivers and all of this. And there was only one person who said it was okay. And this was my childhood piano teacher, whose name was Sandra. And when I called her up to say that I was going to Colombia, she said, oh my God, this is amazing. You can stay with my grandmother in her house and she'll take care of you. And I'm thinking like, this is going to be great. I'm going to have a guide who can take me all around the cities and it would be wonderful. Turns out that Sandra's grandmother, kind as she was 96 years old and couldn't get out of bed. And she locked the door every night at 7 p.m. and didn't let me leave the house after the sun went down, which, you know, I originally was very upset about because I was hearing like screams from soccer games, like from the stadium. And I'm thinking, oh my God, all I want to do is leave this house. But what happened was I started writing for the first time after dark in this woman's home, keeping journal entries of who I'd met during the day and the people that I'd spoken with and the experiences that I'd had. And it was the first time that I ever wrote about being somewhere else in earnest. And honestly, it was the first probably journalism that I'd ever done without knowing it. So when it came time for me to write a senior thesis in college a couple of years later, I looked back at the journals that I'd kept in Sandra's grandmother's house in the middle of the night. Not in the middle of the night, actually, it was like 8 p.m. But I remembered that all of these people were saying, well, if you want to understand a country like Colombia, maybe you should travel down this river, the Magdalena, which cuts a cross section through it all. It's one of the most storied rivers in all of the American continent. You have to go. And so I went. And that was the impetus for this journey. I also think that I wanted to understand Colombia because it is inherently a misunderstood place that is filled with this kind of kaleidoscope of diverse peoples and landscapes and species, but especially in the sense of the people, the fact that there were not only indigenous Colombians and Afro-Colombians and mestizo Colombians, which is what I think most people think about when they think of people from Latin America, but there are also Arab Colombians and Jewish Colombians and German-speaking Colombians and just kind of this whole wide range of people living in a country that I don't think people think about in terms of its diversity in the way that they should. And so the fact that this one river could kind of cut a cross section through all of this was really interesting to me. And that's why I decided to travel down it.
That leads me to another question. How did the Colombians react when they learned you were Jewish?
This is something that I write about briefly in the book. So for those of you who have read, maybe we can talk about this, but I tried not to, so basically when you go far away, I think we've all kind of maybe had these experiences, but people tend to ask the most essential questions, the simplest questions, which is like, who are you? Where are you coming from? What is your last name? Because it doesn't sound like the last names that we've heard around here, or maybe it does. And so we want to know where you're from, basically, is the main question. But in Colombia, one of the first questions that I would get was, what is your religion? Which is very strange because there was no, I don't present as Jewish really in any way. So I wouldn't think that they would have any idea to ask. But anyway, it's very important, it seemed to be in those communities, what my religion was. And so it was something that people asked. And I didn't really know what to say, because to say that I was Catholic like they were because I was scared would have been a lie and not the right thing to do. And obviously they also would have called me out on it very quickly because I know nothing about Catholicism and it would have been a big mess. To say that I was Jewish, though, could have caused problems because we all know that being Jewish is sometimes an unwelcome thing in certain places. And so I was scared to say that too. So usually my answer, which is true, was that I'm not very religious. That was just kind of what I would say. I'm not very religious. And that actually got people pretty upset as well because they were not happy that I wasn't very religious. So when I did tell people that I was Jewish, actually, I'll never forget this. I was invited to lunch by a public librarian who I think knew that I was Jewish all along, maybe because he'd read something that I'd written without telling me in the past, because I read about it a lot. But he was asking me all of these leading questions about religion. And I realized after a while that he knew that I was Jewish. And so I said, you know, my family are Jews. And suddenly he started reciting to me all of this literature that he'd read about Judaism and all of these kind of wonderful histories that he was familiar with. This is in a small town in the Andes Mountains in Colombia. And again, I think it plays back to this idea that we have all these preconceived notions of what people will think about us, but we don't give people the chance to maybe ask to, well, I don't know, when we are asked certain questions, we don't think about what that exchange might look like. We have all these understandings of what it will be, but usually it's very different. And so we ended up having this kind of beautiful conversation over lunch about what it means to be Jewish in America and how that's different in Latin America, because there are Jews in Colombia and everybody knows it. So it was very complicated. I tried not to talk about it as much as I could because it's just true. Like, you don't want to announce that you're Jewish now, especially in today's world, I don't think, especially when you're alone traveling in a foreign place. But when I did, it was actually kind of beautiful. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. How does your love of stories and travel reflect your Jewish roots?
100%. We all know that like being Jewish means being a storyteller, I think, at least, right? Because we're taught to ask questions and to remember our history and our family. And when I was growing up, kind of having this family from all over the world, I distinctly remember hearing these stories, mainly in English, but also like kind of peppered with Arabic or Spanish or Hebrew or French or whatever languages they'd picked up along the way in their travels. I'd heard these stories, and at first, all I wanted to do as a writer was to like preserve the family histories that I thought were so beautiful and maybe rare and disappearing as people were getting older, because it's a pretty unique mix. I don't really know anybody who's like me, at least in the United States. So for a long time it was that I just wanted to do that. And as some of you may remember, I would do projects related to like my mom's family's Iraqi Jewish heritage and things like that. And when I got to college, I kind of turned that outward and realized that not only was I interested in telling stories about my own family's past, but maybe I was also interested in learning about other people's histories and their present day lives as well. And that's what got me into journalism, or writing nonfiction stories about people and places. So, but it is all rooted, I think, in the family tradition of storytelling that still goes on today, in our family at least, and I'm sure in all of your families too. I feel like it's a very Jewish thing to have this like historian in the family who kind of keeps track of all of, and hopefully that historian role gets passed down through the generations. I'm working on a new project now where it delves more deeply into that, that idea of like, what is the responsibility of the family historian? Is it to track down the dates and the names of the places like very specifically? Or is it really to kind of make sense of these broader histories in a way that's meaningful for us today? So, but anyway, that's all background to saying that, yes, I mean, it's all very rooted in being Jewish, I think.
How did you make the transition from writing your senior thesis to writing a book?
Yeah, well, I didn't know that this was going to be a book when I was writing it as my senior thesis. It's also very different now than it was when it was my college project. At first, when I was in school, I thought that I was writing this because there would be like these individual chapters that maybe I could sell to a newspaper or something and like start a career as a freelance journalist just from like little snippets of this longer project. But as I was getting towards my graduation and thinking about what I wanted to do, I was realizing that maybe this could exist as a book. And in fact, I guess other people were thinking it too, because when I was presenting kind of like this instead to a group of professors, one professor who's also a journalist at the New York Times, I'd never met him before, jumped out of his seat afterwards and came up to me and said, "You need to meet my agent. He'll help you turn this into a book."
Oh, wow.
And so that was the catalyst for this. And then obviously there was a long editing process and all of that now makes this longer and I think better than my senior thesis in a lot of ways. But yeah, that was how it started, which is a crazy story.
I liked how you inserted yourself in the book. I mean, you did your journalism, you talked to the people, but you were there, you were in the book. And I enjoyed that. Did reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez influence the course of your journey?
Very, very much, yes. How many people here, I'm curious, like are familiar with the work of Garcia Marquez? Okay, so a lot of people. Oh, great, and in the Zoom too. So 100 Years of Solitude, Love in the Time of Cholera, these are books that were very important to me when I was reading, and go back to this idea of, I think, a similar tradition of storytelling and oral histories that exists in Colombia specifically, but also more broadly in Latin America. It's not Jewish in this case, but maybe there are definitely links. The Magdalena was the river of Garcia Marquez's life, of his childhood, and he writes a lot about it in his fiction and in his nonfiction alike. So when I was traveling the river, and in the book I mentioned this, a lot of the people who I met would say that Garcia Marquez's fiction was actually true. They would say these are the true stories of our lives, and he's just putting it off as a fiction because it's what people will buy and read. But really, it's our true stories, which is a cool concept because a lot of his fiction is very magical. It's like magical realism, and they're saying that, I guess, the realist aspect of what he's written is all based in fact, which is true. If you read interviews that he's done, so much of it is based on his things that his grandparents told him or his great-grandparents told him. And in the course of my journey, I also found people who had links to Garcia Marquez's books, like the filigree jeweler in near the end. This I'm going to bring it here because I brought the show and tell here. Yeah, but so it will be hard to see maybe in the Zoom, but I will put it to the camera. This is yeah. Yeah, this is
I can bring it over here now. No, because I'm here.
wrong.
No, not gonna say no.
Here. Well, this is maybe a little too complicated. It's okay. This is Simon Villanueva, the master filigree jeweler. He's zooming in. And this is one of his little silver fishes. I wonder if it's possible to see, but it's probably too hard. But there, I have it on the table here. So for the people here, you can look at it later. So it's very intricate kind of silver and gold designs. Yes, and they're saying that they can see it. That's great. So it's really beautiful. And in 100 Years of Solitude, there's a character who spends his final days making little silver and gold filigree fishes, then melting the metal down and doing it all over again in this kind of inescapable cycle of dementia. And yeah, I'm going to show you. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's good. But still, yeah. So it is this character who, in many ways, like exists in a very real way in this widely read book. But there I was, just myself, sitting on his front stoop as he was just like making these fishes. And the thing about him that was really special was that he hadn't had many customers for like 50 years. And so all of his jewels were just piling up in a glass cabinet right next to him. But he said he couldn't stop. Like he just had to keep making these little articles of beauty in a world that he said was kind of filled with struggle, which was very special. So it's these kinds of stories that are very like Marquezian that exist in real life too. It was cool.
You mentioned an association with the Rio Magdalena with one of the biblical rivers surrounding the Garden of Eden. How did your journey down the river echo Jewish themes?
Yeah, this was a really interesting thing that I learned, that when Spanish conquistadors ended up in Colombia, it was so rich with biodiversity that they actually thought the Magdalena was one of the rivers of like the Garden of Eden, and that they had found paradise. Obviously untrue, but it was Colombia. but I think that there's so much that we try to explain of the real world with these themes of, I don't know, that exist in religion. And that was a constant along the Magdalena. And I mean, religion can be substituted with magic, spirituality, right? Like enchantment, these ideas of like these aspects of real life that have tinges of magic. I think a lot of the stories in Judaism have that. They are magical realist stories. Like they take real things that happen and they try to explain them with magic and kind of impossible events. So it is an interesting comparison to think about. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because that's something that I haven't thought about in a while, the Garden of Eden, and how people actually thought it was so beautiful and rich with this biodiversity, which it still is. And hopefully that inspires people to protect it more.
Describe your favorite section of the Rio Magdalena.
It changes every day, much like the river, doesn't it?
Like the title.
Yeah, that title, let me tell you, that title comes up too much now in everyday life. Like my friends will make fun of me. Like I'll say like, oh, well, you never know. I don't know, in some situation in our lives, they'll say, oh, things change all the time. Like the river. I'm like, oh my God, I can't escape it now. So, but my favorite section of the Rio Magdalena, now thinking about it, because I've been talking about the book a lot, and the part that people seem to, I'll say what others I feel like maybe have felt is their favorite part, which is then made it one of my favorite parts. Was the only stretch of the river that I could travel by boat was this fast ferry that I took from a town called Barranca Bermeja to another town called El Banco, and my companion for that journey, yes, was this woman. Yes, no, perfect. So this is what everybody said. Is this woman? Her name was Alejandra Majorca. And I didn't know her. She was a friend of a friend of a friend. Literally, like she just kind of showed up one day with like a camping tent. She was like, just in case the boat sinks and we need to camp on the banks of the river, I'm prepared. And I was like, this is not good. this is not good. But it turns out that she has this very beautiful life story of not being rooted and feeling like she wants to wander and live life to the fullest wherever she can in her way. And she feels like her destiny is kind of to move about the world. And she told me this story she said, I died once. Let me tell you about the story when I died. And I said, what? You died? And she said, yes, I died. She was in a car accident and a lamp post fell on the car and like she was knocked unconscious and her heart stopped and she was in the hospital and supposedly she was dead for a few minutes before they revived her. And she said that in that moment, she didn't see the light, as people say, but she had a dream that she was offered a really refreshing Coca-Cola. She's on the edge of death and like this Coca-Cola was suddenly the most like beautiful thing in the whole world for her. And she's never going to forget that she wanted this Coca-Cola. And for whatever reason, we were in the middle of talking about kind of Colombia as a country and its decline and how people tend to kind of live on the edge a lot. And there's this very beautiful culture and people right next to so much darkness. And her story really beautifully encapsulated this because of her near-death experience and the beauty of that dream that will stick with her forever. She has then turned the focus of her life to helping other people, to living life to the fullest with meaning and not worrying so much about money as much as she can afford not to worry about money. And I think people really connect with that because here so much of our lives are spent busy and stressed about making money and working. And to see somebody like her who is succeeding at living a life that in many ways like we dream about living, I think that people have really connected with that. And it is very kind of also emblematic of the situation along the river that I spoke with many people about. So that's lately been my favorite part of the river to talk about.
Well, my last question is actually for your parents. How did you feel about this journey when he was first starting out?
They have not been asked the question, but they're my groupies. They come to all these talks, but they haven't been asked yet.
Say, sorry, let's speak.
As any time when Jordan travels, I look at it as an opportunity to tag along, and I try to go with him to at least part of it sometimes.
The first trip,
and I did. I went with him to Colombia the first trip, and we traveled together. I mean, I was very proud of the fact that he wanted to go to a country like Colombia and tell the story about it. And I think we felt comfortable that Sandra's family was there, and he's a very careful guy. I think we felt comfortable with Jordan's always had a good mind for, risk and being careful and doing the right thing. And he's such a friendly guy. He gets along with everybody everywhere he goes. He just makes friends everywhere. So I think I felt pretty comfortable about it. I don't know about Mona though.
So it's a little bit different because if I don't get a phone call when I think I'm supposed to get a phone call, I imagine the absolute worst and until I get that phone call. And so that I can't remember if it happened on that trip because there have been more recent trips where I've had that to the nth degree. But yes, he's very good about calling when he does get to a place. But until that time, there's always that thing in the back of your mind that says, "Oh, I hope things are okay."
Can I just say one other thing? That
Put the camera on so people can also see you.
We have gotten so used to cell phones and the availability of a phone call, but we forget that when we were young, we traveled and we didn't call home for a month or two. So I think it's kind of almost unfair what we do to our kids. So just want to say that. Hi.
I'll add. He met me at the end of that first trip when I was in Sandra's grandmother's house. Afterwards, I went somewhere else in Colombia, and we had a bit of an adventure, which was cool. And I think that that you saw what was the situations, and in the same way that I ended up meeting people along the Magdalena, maybe that made you feel more comfortable. But this was, a lot of people ask me about the security and the safety of a trip like this. And the truth is that I was very lucky that I was doing this funded by Princeton, which was, they basically gave me all of the resources where there was a number that I could call if I needed to be taken out for whatever reason. They would come, I don't know how, maybe a helicopter or something. I have no idea. But these are the things that traveling with this kind of privilege of this institution behind you gives you, that I think a lot of other people in certain situations don't have. And so, I was able to get a phone plan where I could use my own phone anywhere and call the United States. Like, and there is, you know, signal and access. Like there are a lot of places where there was remote areas where I didn't have service, but like, you know, even in the smallest towns like Estación Cocorná, where I was with the hippos, like every night I was able to call people I knew and tell them how things were going. So like, you know, in that way it was, I think that there's an imagination of like, I was completely off the grid for 4 weeks, which is just not, it's modern life. Like people there have phones and obviously, and like use Facebook and WhatsApp and things. And so there's no situation in which like I would be, for whatever reason, just completely unreachable, except right at the beginning, that first trip before you came, for whatever reason, I didn't bring my phone to Colombia. And I don't know why, like now thinking back, this was not smart, but I brought like this tiny analog phone where only people could call me and I couldn't call others. And I'm thinking now back that was a strange decision, but I don't know. It didn't give me distractions, I guess. So I was able to keep those journals at the beginning.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll open it up to the audience. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah.
Jackie. Thank you very much for this beautiful book and a beautiful talk. It was really quite an experience and you did such a wonderful job. I wondered if you could say something about the experience, the dark side of this journey. I found it extremely painful to think of this river with cadavers floating down to the point some villagers stopped calling the police and they would just pull the body out. And that was somebody's son or cousin that was just floating dead, unburied. And it happened over and over and over. Then the pollution and the garbage that was accumulating in different places along the river, and then other places where the river was drying up. I found it very dark, and your talk doesn't convey that. Even the book doesn't. You report it all, but you don't sound depressed about it. And I wonder if you could give a word about that aspect, which I found almost excruciating.
Yeah, well, it's extremely depressing. I tend to find now in writing these kinds of stories that if you only focus on how depressing it is, people won't read it. Because there's so much in the world now that's like very, very depressing. And so what I tried to do very specifically in this book was to tell stories of beauty that then illustrated all of these horrible things that are real problems in a way that is subtle, but it seems as though you got the message, right? In your case, right? Like you understood how excruciating and how terrible it was. So hopefully that means that those stories were effective in communicating this. But I do think that it would be a very different book if I told the story of this river as like a river of death, as opposed to a river of love and beauty, like fleeting moments of beauty that you could find people making the most of these very, very terrible situations. Also, I mean, look, like somebody was murdered a year after someone I met along the river and traveled into the Andes with, was murdered a year after I met him because he was a defender of the environment. And that is a very real problem in Colombia. It's the most dangerous country in the world for environmentalists. So there are like reasons why there are reasons why the country is changing and coming out of, I mean, there was a 50-year conflict. There's terrible stories that come out of this place. But those stories have been repeated and repeated and repeated, that they're important to remember, but maybe now we should be looking at them with a different perspective of like, who are the people who are working to make these situations better? That's what I tried to do. But I don't really have a good answer because there's so many problems in everything. And yeah.
Which is the glimmer of hope, like the turtle farms, or just like that people did not give up. And I understand what you're explaining, that if you had emphasized some of the pain more, it would be melodrama, because it's so subtle. And actually, I mean, you report it in a straightforward way, but there's a subtlety because of the affect, the way you're delivering it, that makes it even more powerful, I suppose.
Thanks. What, another question? A question?
Later, there's
Okay.
there's a question.
So, yeah. That was, and also it reflects the reality of what I was living there too. Like this whole book is rooted in my interactions with people. And the fact that people chose to focus on the beauty and the hope and all that is very much why it's reflected in the book. Like, it's not that I went and chose what to show more than the rest. It was really what people were saying. So maybe that says something about the kind of people who I met too. Andrea had a question too, I know.
Ago, you said COVID's a little bit of a problem, but let's say there were no COVID. Would you be at this point saying to yourself, okay, what's the next challenge? Where am I going to go now? What am I going to do?
100%. Yeah. Like one of my dreams now, and my mom will shake her head, but I want to go to Baghdad. Like I want to go. Yeah, I really want to go. And I haven't figured out a way to do it yet that makes sense. But when I do, that's like the next big adventure in my mind. Yeah. I think it's in Iraq has started a similar transition that Colombia was going through. And I'll be very interested to see what that, and also Jewish history too. People there who still live there.
Yeah. So would you do the Euphrates River
4
then?
weeks down the Tigris, or 4 weeks.
Oh,
down
the Tigers of
Euphrates?
Euphrates.
Maybe.
Wow.
Maybe.
So there's another question there from, yeah, go there.
Where did you hear about some of the legends and mystical stories you included in the book in Colombia, or did you research them before you went? I read a lot about the river and about Colombia before I went, but when it comes to the legends and the myths, actually, I thought this whole book was going to be a collection of folk tales at the beginning, because I knew this river was so storied, but only when I went there did I start hearing what the actual stories were. And I thought that was really important because I wanted to, again, much like with the reality, I wanted to also focus on what people grasped to in terms of the legends and the folktales. Like, I didn't want to use the oldest examples just because they've been written about a lot. I wanted to go and hear what people were talking about at the moment. And of course, what they choose to, the stories they choose to tell reflect the reality in many ways as well. So that was a good question. And that was from Beth. Thank you, Beth. Rhonda, what did your brothers think about your journey? Hi, Rhonda. What did your brothers think about your journey? Oh, I don't know. Well, I really don't know. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. So Michael, my youngest brother, is also interested in the environment and storytelling and people in nature. And so I think he saw, maybe, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but maybe he saw me do this and he was like, oh, well, this is something that's now possible that I can do too, but take it from a different angle and in a different place. Michael really wants to go to Gabon. So if anybody knows anybody in Gabon, give us a call. Yeah.
Are they at all coordinated? Are they supported by the government, or is it NGOs or organizations outside of the US, or, are each of the lady who did the turtles? I mean, is there any coordination? How does it work?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. With the turtles, that's a good example of how some projects are, and mostly by NGOs, not really by the government. Mostly by NGOs or by regional environmental groups that are regional government affiliated, but not the federal government. And so, but like the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Nature Conservancy, the World Wildlife Fund, and then their affiliates. We were speaking before about these affiliate organizations that are really the ones that do the work on the ground that are really important. But like in the example of the turtle community, she's doing really great work. She doesn't have the financial or organizational support that maybe she needs to do the work correctly. That was a big thing that was raised by scientists, is that she is doing really important work in changing communities' perceptions about river turtles, and not to eat them, but to conserve them. But what she's doing is she's hatching turtle eggs and releasing them back into the wild, which is great in some situations, but in her area, maybe that's not the targeted or the most effective conservation strategy. Though it is effective, it's just not the most effective. And so there's like complexities that only scientific institutions know about, and that needs to be brought to the regular people who are doing the work. that's what's missing right now, is that connection. And I mean, it makes sense. These are communities that have really nothing. And so it's up to people who have resources to be to help. I mean, organizations that have resources to be able to help them. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
To do this. Hi. So I was captivated by so many parts in your book. They are with me now. But you talk in these from a very young age. My brothers and I learned to fall in love with the natural world, and I think that only once you have fallen in love with something can you truly not bear to see it disappear. And as an educator, you know, I wonder what things should we be doing now to help our children fall in love with things that even if like here, right, in our area, I'm thinking New York, not only Israel and Jewish tradition, but here, New York, the Hudson River, if you take a river, what are things that you think we could be doing better so children will grow up like you and not bear to see it disappear?
That's a really hard question. I'm not, well, you know, I'm not a teacher. I really don't have a good answer, but maybe I think that what I've seen is that having experiences, like as opposed to talking about things, and now obviously having experiences is very hard because of COVID and all of that, but like being able to experience things firsthand, to touch and to feel and to smell, and like that is what but you know this, so I feel like I shouldn't be telling you because yeah, from my experience, yeah, you know, going to the lakes in Pelham and the Hutchinson River, as disgusting as it is, like looking for otters in the river, right? Like kayaking to look for seals in the Bronx, like that's harder. But there are things very, very close here, like Orchard Beach is an amazing place, and Pelham Bay Park is an amazing place that I don't think people explore enough besides that boardwalk there. So I think that there are places here that we can appreciate more, maybe. I really don't, yeah, I think that it's all about experience. That's at least what it was like for me. Yeah.
Environmental degradation. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Sure.
The question, if people didn't hear, was that when I came home, I started talking about how the end of conflict was actually accelerating environmental degradation in Colombia in certain ways, which is really counterintuitive. But what happened was there were so many armed groups hiding out in the rainforest that for a long time, the people who wanted to cut down the rainforest were too scared to go in. And now that the armed groups are gone, like the guerrilla group, like the FARC has demobilized, a lot of these tracts of forest are opening up to these battles between extractive industries. And then people like Salamanca, the anthropologist who I met in the beginning of the book, who was murdered, local people are kind of caught in the middle who want to use this opportunity as an opportunity to defend the land. So it's really complicated and sad.
The fact, I guess, in the 20s, it's steamboats, right? With people dancing and sort of cruising and having a great old time. And, you know, what do you make of the fact that somehow it went from, you know, a really nice situation to just, you know, degraded and got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And it seems incredible one backwards.
The question being, the question being, I hear that things are maybe even going backwards. That the glory days were in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. But what I think about a lot now, especially in reflecting on all of it, is that it was those very glory days that caused the decline. Like the steamboats needed fuel, which meant that the trees were being cut down. And because the trees were being cut down, the sediment poured into the river, and that meant that there were no more steamboats anymore. Right. And now too, like the same questions of development, like what do we call progress? Is dredging the river to make it navigable on a commercial highway again, is that progress? There are some people who say yes, and there's some people who say no. And so the same, like looking back at the history of it, what happened, and talking to people about how they feel about, I mean, these are questions that we're dealing with in the United States. Like, it's not just Colombia, it's all over the world. Is like, how do we continue to make life better for people and and enjoyable for people while reconciling the destruction that comes with a lot of our like fast-paced, super high-tech and like immediate life.
Right, it's sort of like,
Yeah.
some of what we're dealing with now with all the, when Robert Moses made all the tires, everybody
It was great.
Right.
Right, and now people are realizing that just something like the Cross Bronx Expressway has spewed tremendous amounts of asthma on either side, and kids are getting sick. So it's, yeah, I guess it's the same. Thank you.
Same thing, no, exactly.
It is the same thing. You think this is awesome and wonderful, but yeah.
Right. A lot of times things are most convenient,
Damaging, which is a question that everybody's dealing with now. Is there another? Oh no, nobody from Zoom. Yeah.
I was interested in this.
Moto Bandinera, you said the most curious form of transportation in all of Colombia, and that there was this, that you really had experiences that are so unlike things that we're used to get on these in the middle of the night, taking, or not middle of the night, but in the evening, traveling at breakneck speeds. Maybe, I don't know if you want to talk more about how you felt, and that when there was a lady who, when you asked if the station you wanted was coming up, she was like, "Oh no, that's not really there," and sort of that feeling of the Latin experience that people took this for granted. That was kind of intense. The intensity maybe of Colombia.
Yeah. Well, the Moto Bandinera, for those who don't know, is this like wooden platform with railroad wheels powered by a motorcycle on a railroad track. And they told me that if the train comes at us, we have to just be ready to jump, like sitting on plastic chairs and just have to jump. And they all were like, "Oh no, don't worry. Like they call us when the train's coming and we don't run the thing." We're like, "You never know. I mean, you're on the railroad track. It's like, it's scary." But these are aspects of the adventure element of the trip, like what made it a really interesting experience, an intense experience for sure. But also it's indicative of like the things people have to do to get by, like in real life. I mean, the fact that infrastructure isn't good enough, that a lot of people use their main way of getting from town to town as this like rickety railroad cart powered by a motorcycle on a freight train track. It's crazy. And what I tried to do in this book was fill it with these details that if you are just reading it kind of blindly, the first thing you'll think is, "Oh my God, this is so interesting or wacky or an adventurous element." But if you continue to read and then you think about it, you stop for a second, you're like, "Well, wait a second. People are doing this because they have to. I'm doing it because I want to, but I'm doing it with people who are doing it because they have to. And like, what is the difference there?" Yeah. Anybody else? Great. Well, sure.
You mentioned when a place is warm, the people are warm too, and that it sounded like from the book, although Jackie was asking about the sadness, that in general the people were very optimistic. I know in Venezuela, I've never experienced a more optimistic people, and I'm like the warmth of the people. It's certainly a place I would want to live forever, if the situation were not difficult. In Colombia, it sounds like people were just giving you friends. Here, talk to this friend, do this.
The reason I never do this is because I created this like line of trust with people who are so willing to introduce me to their friends. And like my childhood piano teacher introduced me to her grandmother, who introduced me to their friend, who introduced me to a friend at the beginning of the river, who introduced me to a friend further down the river, and a friend of a friend of a friend was Alejandra, the woman who took the ferry with me. And it was like this beautiful, like the way in which I made contacts and the hospitality and kindness. Like everybody was terrified for me when I went to Colombia, both times, and yet all I found was kindness.
Just for your safety.
Some people were, and I think that maybe one of the reasons why people were so willing to take me was because they saw like this is a young guy, kind of by himself, doing this thing that maybe isn't the easiest thing to do. Let's take him in and with open arms and help, which I got in a lot of cases. Yeah, I have been back since I traveled to Magdalena. but I haven't been back since the pandemic. I would love to, well, my dream is that this book gets translated into Spanish, which is out of my hands, but I don't know like when or if that will happen. But the dream is that it will get translated into Spanish. The people in the book are able to enjoy it like people who speak English are able to enjoy it. And then I can go present the book in Colombia. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's had a remarkable launching as a debut book, considering the New York Times picking it as one of the best travel books of 2021. It's really been remarkable and well deserved. I wonder, how have reviews in other parts of the country been? And how has the reception been in maybe than we are dealing with now? Do you have any inkling of how it's reached?
Not yet, because it just came out a couple weeks ago. Hopefully I will get it out pretty soon. But this book is the big challenge is to actually get it into people's hands to read it in the first place. As it is with all books, you know better than right. Like it's just really hard. But in this specific case, like it's a topic that people maybe don't know about or that they don't know that they're interested in. It's kind of random and niche. The hope is that they open it and then they start reading it and they want to keep reading it. But to actually get it in their hands is hard.
It should post a review on Amazon Books and on Goodreads. Everyone here, because publishers count them and readers look at them, and it's tremendously important. You can even post more than one.
Oh no. Thank you, Gloria. Yes, no, that would be very, very helpful for me. It's all algorithms now too. It's like how books get promoted and things. Okay.
There's a question from the same house. Thank you for this book and this talk. Do you keep in touch with any of the people
You met on this journey. I'll wave here. Yes. So it's really great because I think that in the past, like travel writing is filled with these fleeting encounters where you meet somebody and then never hear from them again. I actually don't really understand how people could have written this kind of book 50 years ago with only letters as the way, and especially in places like this where I would imagine it would be very difficult to mail a letter to successfully. But in this case, everybody has Facebook, everybody has WhatsApp, and I've kept in touch for 3 years with most of the people in this book. And in fact, like what I wrote about them was not just defined by what happened when I met them, but the conversations that have continued over time, which I think makes for very deep encounters and an ability to maybe understand their situation better than I would have had I just spent the 3 days with them or whatever and then left. So I was really grateful for that. And I hope that people continue to do that in journalism in general, because it's really important not to abandon people. Also, everybody knows about this book. Like people know that they're written about, people know how they're written about. Like I know also that we live in a world where I will publish this book and the people in it will read it no matter where they live, no matter how far away they are. With Google Translate, I've been able to send chapters to people. In fact, the traveling donkey library, Luis Soriano, when I went to visit him again after the fact, that was where I went. I brought with him like this roughly translated Spanish version of what I wrote that I did. That wasn't really that good, but still I brought it to him and he brought it with him as we like walked around with his donkey library again, which was really cool. Like my story was one of the stories that he carried with him. It's nice. So hopefully this book can one day be in that collection too.
Well, thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
This was great. Thank you all for reading. Thanks to the Zoom people too. This was really nice. And hopefully we can, talk more about this and other things soon. So I really am grateful to the PJC for everything. Yeah.
There is a movie on Netflix now about Teddy going down a river in the Amazonas with Marechal Rondon. It's called The American Guest. It's a series. It's a short series. You will love it because they're kind of finding a new river that nobody had found, and it's a true story.
Really? The American Guest?
the American gas. He goes, Teddy Roosevelt goes down to the Amazons and meets Rondon, who is an environmentalist from Brazil, and they make this trek. It's unbelievable. So I think it will be inspiring for you.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is-
Nice to meet you too. Yeah, thanks for coming. I'm happy to meet you too. I've heard a lot about you and your amazingly literary speeches is what I've actually heard.
You can get all of them on YouTube. There
Really?
is a PJC, there's a Palantir Center channel.
Right.
And you
Okay,
can,
see you
no,
on
you
YouTube.
can listen to this and come here on Shabbat or Friday night. And we would like, yeah.
Yes.
No, I actually still don't.
Yeah.
Come to Shabbat or come to Friday night. You're gonna enjoy.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And it's nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Huh?
Thank you, everybody on Zoom. We'll be closing
Oh, that's
now.
perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.